You're your own visionary. I think that's what's happening in culture now, to the extent that so many people are on a search to find meaning in various ways. And we're all mystics and visionaries, not just Mary Magdalene, not just any mystic of East and West. I think that's the invitation. All that means really is that you go on your own path. You don't follow some institution. That's basically what it means.
Welcome to Caritas Consciousness Project. I'm Gloria Coelho, and Caritas is dedicated to promoting the evolution of consciousness as the key to individual growth and global healing. In addition to our online presentations such as tonight, or this morning actually for me, with guest speakers, we offer classes and study groups also online. We draw from a wide assortment of both ancient wisdom and leading-edge studies in science, consciousness, spirituality, and philosophy. We are now in our 20th year. We started in 2003 at our center in Boulder, Colorado. However, it wasn't until 2020 that we began recording our presentations on Zoom. We have over 100 presentations now. Our video recordings are viewable through our website, caritascenter.org, and on our YouTube channel, Caritas Consciousness Project. And as a nonprofit organization, we do rely on the support of our members and donors to keep this program going. So if you would like to support this program, we really appreciate it. You can make a donation on any page of our website, or become a member by going to the membership page. And now let me introduce our speaker today. And I'll just get to my notes. Hang on one second. I need to let some people in. Okay. Veronica Goodchild, PhD, is Professor Emerita at Pacifica Graduate Institute and an affiliate member of the Interregional Society of Jungian Analysts. Educated in London and the USA, she's a teacher, Jungian psychotherapist, and author. Led by dreams and pursuing her long interest in the spirit-matter connection and the subtle realm, she has explored sacred sites in England, France, Greece, Peru, and Egypt. Walking solo on one of the Camino paths in France, initiated by a dream, and her concerns about our environmental crisis inspired her to create her own pilgrimage journeys, combining visits to sacred sites with the mythic and ancient stories that underlie many temples, shrines, and oracular portals. A recent trip to Egypt has rekindled an abiding interest in our relationship to the stars and our cosmic origins. Veronica lives in Southwest France. Welcome, Veronica. Thank you so much for being here today with us and returning to Caritas.
Thank you so much, Gloria. It's such a pleasure to be here. And I had no idea when we made the time, I wasn't aware that it was this sort of eclipse, and I think I might have chosen another day actually, but anyway, it's a powerful energetic portal this month in general because of the eclipses. I'm sure everybody's having their version of it. We can certainly see it activated around the world. Anyway, here we are, and it's a delight to be here.
Great. So would you
I share my okay.
Yes, you can share your screen if you'd like.
Let's share the screen. I'll move to my
while you're doing that, I'm just going to show them the book. Okay. Here is a book by Veronica called Songlines of the Soul that our little study group is reading, and it's just amazing. It's an amazing book about so many things relevant to us today, and many of them with ancient origins. It's a very exciting read. So I highly recommend it.
Okay, well, would you like me to start? Is this a good moment to start?
Whenever you're ready.
This talk is titled Mary Magdalene, the Chalice of the Grail, and the Path of the Blue Rose. And I'm sure you're aware there are lots and lots of material on Mary Magdalene, especially at this time. And so I just wanted to mention that I will be approaching this from a Jungian point of view, which is my background for, oh gosh, over 50 years probably. But also so that will be, I'll be picking up archetypal, mythic, and imaginal themes, and my own experiences, of course. I also have a great interest in shamanism and mysticism. And the other thing I want to say is that when we're talking on these topics, I'm talking about a live tradition. At the beginning of the Gospel of the Beloved Companion, Mary writes, Mary Magdalene, this is the testimony of the Son of Humanity. This is the testimony. It's a living tradition, in other words. And it may be 2,000 years old, but it's living now. And she says at the end of that first paragraph, I am with him in the beginning, and I am with him in the end. And I know that his testimony is true. So I thought, by way of starting, I would talk about 3 important experiences that actually led me into this material, so that you know where I'm coming from. It wasn't an intellectual interest at all. I was led by my dreams. And so let me just tell you 3 experiences that really are key for me. One was when I was 18. I'd finished, what we call grammar school in England, but high school in America. I went that summer, I went to Israel to work on a kibbutz. But, we worked from sort of 4 a.m. till 10 because of the sun, and then we had the day free. So a friend and I that I met there would go around it's not a big country, to look at all the sacred sites. And I had quite a few important experiences there. But there's one I wish to mention here in terms of this talk. And it was while I was in the Dead Sea. I was floating in the Dead Sea, surrounded by ancient caves, that I only much later, of course, learned housed the Essene community, which was a Jewish community that Jesus and Mary Magdalene belonged to. But while I was floating there, I felt that I knew the place, that the landscape activated some memory code in the cells of my soul. It was my first conscious experience of having had a past life. But as with all past life experiences, the question is, how is it relevant to the present moment? This we have to ask, because there may be unfinished business that needs attending to. So that was my first conscious. I'd never heard of such things, but I just knew that I knew the place, so I must have been there before. So that was a question. How was it relevant? And that's a question I carried with me because I had no idea. But the experiences I had there, including this one, really, it sort of forced me to change what I was going to read at the university, which was law, and I changed to theology. I wanted to understand more about this tradition, and I wanted to understand about my mystical experiences. Of course, being at university at that time didn't help at all with my experiences, so that was kind of a failed experiment. But during the first term, we were reading St. John's Gospel from the New Testament in Greek, and I just had this profound feeling of being moved by this gospel. and because he wrote so much about love, and I didn't really understand what he was talking about at all. I didn't know that it was probably a Gnostic text, different from Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and all of that. But it remained with me. Again, it touched me in a deep way. 23 years later, I had the following dream. I'm part of a group once again studying the Gospel of John, trying to penetrate its mystery, feeling called down into the depths of my being, that layer beneath everything I know and everything I've been taught. In the dream, the rest of the study group moves on, but I'm compelled to remain with the text, as if trying to decipher some esoteric level to it. I knew without a shadow of a doubt in the dream that there was another document beneath it. The dream evoked a numinous feeling response. It also propelled me toward further graduate studies, and that's when I started the pursuit of my PhD. Again, 24 years later, I had another powerful dream. This time, it was a sort of dream vision. It was in June of 2016. And in the dream, I'm working with a woman on her dreams by the seashore. Suddenly, looking out to sea, and as if a veil has parted, I see the chalice of the Grail arising out of the ocean. It's showered with golden light from above, and it's drawing up water from below and spewing it out like a fountain. I just marvel at it. The energetic luminosity of the dream and its powerful and sacred impact wakes me up. Now, let me not forget to move the slides. Let's see. Whoops. So this is an evocation that my friend Taria, who I think is on this call, gave me because it reminded her of the dream, the ocean below, the water being pulled up and spraying out, and the light coming up from above, and the energy coming from below, and the Grail in the middle. It's the Ace of Cups. I'm going to come back to this dream, but before moving forward, there's one event that needs mentioning in terms of my own story. And this is the publication of the Gospel of the Beloved Companion, this one. It was published in 2010 by Jean de Quillon, who's part of the tradition that has held this document since the 1st century. It's the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. It's a complete gospel. And it was only translated, and she's added commentary as well, in English. It was published in 2010, so that gives you an idea. But it actually came to the Languedoc region of France, where I live, in the 1st century from Alexandria. And it's been held within this community who's protected it through the centuries. Now, there are fragments of Mary Gospels that are in fact dated later, that are part of the Gnostic tradition, which I'm going to come to. But this is the complete Mary Magdalene Gospel. In the Gospel, she's called Miryam, and Jesus is called Yeshua. And this was the strange thing. I didn't actually read it. A really dear friend gave it to me in about 2016 or 17. It must have been, I think, after my dream. I don't remember precisely when it was. But when I read it the first time, I knew that this was the gospel that was beneath the John Gospel in my dream, that there was this other text. And indeed, 20, however many years afterwards, I was handed a copy of it. And when I read it, I said, that's it. That's the gospel. I knew it was there, which may sound really strange, but you know how sometimes you just know things. And in fact, nowadays, scholars actually think that Mary Magdalene was the author of St. John's Gospel too. Be highly redacted, of course, by the church. We'll get into that a little bit. So I want to very briefly mention, I have a lot of material. I hope you can hang in with me. it was very, very long. And actually, I cut it immensely. And I thought, well, with this talk, what I'll try to do is really mention the key themes, or what I feel are the key themes. And you can do your own research, or I've been thinking about doing a course so that these things can be really studied in more depth, which is what they need. This needs to happen. Briefly, Mary Magdalene in the canonical texts, the texts that belong in the New Testament. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are the primary ones that we're concerned with. And just to say that in the New Testament, Mary Magdalene is already a key figure. She plays a major role, particularly in the Passion narratives. I have a slide here she is at the foot of the cross. She's in her red robe. We'll come back to that as well. She's witness to the crucifixion. She was present at the burial. She was the first person to see the empty tomb. And of course, in St. John, some of you may know, there's a beautiful description of when she sees the empty tomb and she's weeping, and Jesus appears and just says her name. She thought it was the gardener at first, and she recognizes him and rushes to embrace him. And he says, don't touch me. Now, there are various ways in which the next sentence follows. He says to her, don't touch me, basically because my process is not yet over. That's what happens in the Gospel of the Beloved Companion. But in the New Testament canon, it says things like, go and tell the disciples that I haven't ascended yet. And I'm not a theologian, so I'm not going to get into what does ascension mean, what does this mean. That would take us too far afield. But the idea is that because she's the first to witness him, he tells her to go and tell the disciples. This earns her the title of the apostle to the apostles. However, in the New Testament text, she's also the woman from whom 7 devils are cast out, for which she is forgiven. This starts to merge with the Catholic Church's portrait of her as a sinful woman and as a prostitute. In fact, Pope Gregory the Great, in a sermon, creates a definitive picture of Mary Magdalene as a sinful, demonically possessed, lustful whore. And this created the official church position for over 1,500 years. I mean, I find this excruciatingly painful, and it makes me very angry. But fortunately, that is being corrected now. And here we have, this is the famous Noli Me Tangere, do not touch me. Now, this is a picture of Mary Magdalene, the Anointer. This is a stained glass window from a church very near where I live, Rennes-le-Château. And this is the stained glass window at the east end of the church, where normally there's, the big crucifix hanging and all of this. Well, at Rennes-le-Château, the picture, this beautiful stained glass window, is of Mary Magdalene in one of the accounts of her when she anoints Jesus. She's weeping. She wipes his feet with her hair, and she anoints him. I won't keep saying beloved companion because it's too long. The GBC, I call it because it's shortcut. In the GBC, it is definitively Mary Magdalene who does this anointing in Gospels. She's highly criticized. The disciples say this is wasteful, etc. But he avidly defends her, even in the New Testament, speaking of her anointing ritual in preparation for his death. speaking of the action as the power of her love, and that she will be remembered. This is amazing. She will be remembered for this sacred act. Basically, wherever the gospel is preached, she will be remembered for doing this. I mean, that's extraordinary. There's some confusion here in the New Testament. Is Mary, who is Mary, and who is Mary of Bethany? But now it's generally agreed that Mary of Bethany, where these anointings took place, is Mary Magdalene. And her identity, this identity is confirmed by Pope Gregory I of Rome in the 6th century and Bernard Clairvaux in the 12th. Now, we're going to very briefly mention some things about the priestess anointing act in a minute. I want to mention that in terms of the biography of Mary Magdalene, there's really nothing in the New Testament. There is a meticulous researcher, a genealogist named Lawrence Gardner, who is a key contribution to the biographical details. And his books are really worth reading because he clarifies a lot of the cultural and historical context that Jesus and Mary Magdalene would have grown up, and their families, of course, would have grown up in. His own emphasis is on the Holy Grail as a bloodline, which goes back to Sumer and Egypt and forward into the present time. This is a bloodline that has been going for centuries and still is going on. The other thing he emphasizes is that the Grail is a code of service. So the Grail is a bloodline to him, and the Grail is a code of service. But it's I'm not really going to go into that because it's too distracting. But do read his books: The Bloodline of the Holy Grail, The Mary Magdalene Legacy, The Grail, something or other. Can't remember the title of the last one, but they really are worth reading. And in terms of biographical details, for example, he adds that it's quite likely that Jesus and others in the Essene group to which he belonged, including Mary Magdalene and other priestesses, traveled to India to train in healing and meditation, Buddhist sacred centers, most likely to Egypt, to study the death and rebirth mysteries of the goddess. And, the primary myth is Isis and Osiris, and that's a myth you probably know about very much, about the death and rebirth mysteries. And also the anointing rituals practiced by the pharaohs. He probably and most likely went to England, to the Druid sacred sites, probably to Glastonbury, to learn their earth-based shamanic practices and visionary traveling. And he also helps us understand the nature of the marriage, which is of great interest today, it seems. People really want to know, were Mary Magdalene and Jesus married? Well, they were. There's a lot of evidence about that. First of all, he was a rabbi, so he would have been required by law to be married, and he's a royal Davidic heir. So he would have been required by his position to marry and to have at least 2 sons. Mary was a priestess in her own right. So the marriage was really important because it was it was joining 2 royal houses, basically. Mary was of Syrian descent, of royal Syrian descent through both her mother and father. Again, Lawrence Gardner goes into that in detail. And her job would have been to do this sacred anointing in preparation of his death, his coming doom. And it's really interesting because in Jeremy Nadler shows a lot of light on this. It's in his books, the pyramid texts. I can't remember, in Shamanism. Can't remember the title. But that's really worth reading too, his work on this. The Egyptian queens were the ones that had the power, and it was their job to anoint the pharaoh for the ritual of the death and rebirth mysteries, which the pharaoh would go through, some say every 30 years, some say less frequently than that. And it had to do with the induction, preparation, endless, deep preparation in order to create a state in which the pharaoh would have, basically a near-death experience would probably be the closest way to describe it, so that he could go, imagine the sarcophagus in the Great Pyramid at Giza, enter the sarcophagus, which is the initiation chamber, and so that he could travel to the stars and meet with the star people, of course, because Isis was very connected to Sirius, and the pharaoh was connected, Osiris was, to the Orion belt, to get the wisdom from the star people, because their consciousness was far more advanced than ours. So the anointing rituals are very, very important. They had 3 children: Tamar, who's sometimes called Sarah, then 2 sons. The first son was Jesus Jr., and the second son was Josephus. Jesus Jr. Inherited the royal title. Josephus carried the Grail tradition. He was called the Grail child. He went to Marseille when Mary and her entourage and Sarah and Josephus went with her, sailed to the south of France. There's lots of historical records about that. Landing at Marseille or Saint-Marie-de-la-Mer is also a recognized place where they might have landed. So he studied at the Druid College in Marseille. Now, I want to say something about the Gnostic texts. So that's just some biographical material to give you a background, because it's probably not, unless you've read these books, you might not be aware that there is this kind of background that's known about them. And I find it extremely interesting, and the traditions to which it links, particularly the connection with Egypt. I'm very interested in that. So to move to the Gospels, the so-called Gnostic Gospel texts. The New Testament, it's important to know, was not actually fixed until about the 4th century. Constantine, the Emperor Constantine, made it the state religion in 313, but the Nicene Creed was created at the Council of Nicaea in 325, but the actual Bible probably was not put together. They were sort of looking at which of all the many texts there are shall we put, and they chose these 4, probably highly redacting them, as most scholars say now. But there wasn't a Bible for 400 years. It would be like saying something that happened, in the 17th century wasn't actually put down into a document till the 21st. It's sort of like that. So a long time, in other words. So before that, the first 3 centuries or so, Christians were just a loosely organized group of Jewish, Greek, Roman, Egyptian Christians. There were mystery schools, there were ascetics. But the Nicene Creed, which was fixed in 325, is still the creed that is read today in the Orthodox, I don't know about the Orthodox, but in the Western Roman Catholic tradition. So this rigid orthodoxy has lasted for ages. However, in 1945, sacred texts in an urn were discovered near Nag Hammadi in Egypt, and eventually they were translated. Now, this is really interesting. they had been buried at a time when the church was attacking the various early Christian groups in Egypt and other Mediterranean lands. And why was this? What the Nag Hammadi literature shows, however, is that overall the texts reveal Christianity quite differently than in the Bible as an initiatory path, a path of love, a journey that can lead to mystical union and illumination in this life, emphasizing the New Testament message that the kingdom of heaven is within you. So this is direct experience of one's own unique path. And this is the word gnosis. That means direct experience, effectively. And now Gnostics were different groups but the word gnosis means direct experience. It's a kind of knowing. It's the knowing that comes from a transformational path of consciousness and toward the opening of the heart. But everybody's journey on that path is unique. You don't need dogma. You don't need a belief system, because it's just going to be what your way of doing that is, or what the dreams and visions and experiences that you have along that path, how that teaches you what your unique path is on this search for the divine. So the Gnostic Gospels were eventually published in a document called the Nag Hammadi Library. They include the Gospels of Thomas and Philip. And what's really quite important about them is how they absolutely highlight the central prominence, of Mary Magdalene in the Christian experience from very, very early on. And they also highlight the nature of the relationship of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. So I'll just give you a couple of excerpts, just so there's some experience of this too. So in Gospel of Philip, there's one I really like. It says, "Those who say that the Lord first died and then was resurrected are wrong. For he was first resurrected and then he died. If someone has not been resurrected, they can only die. If they've already been resurrected, they are alive, as God is alive." So here we clearly see the ancient tradition of the death before you die. Peter Kingsley talks about this, of the true philosophers, as he calls them, from the 4th, 5th century BC. His work is very important too. In the Dark Places of Wisdom is the first one. And that's a great text about these philosophers who were philosophia. They were lovers of wisdom. They weren't just, mental. It's not what philosophy has become. Let's put it that way. They would incubate in dreams, in temples, in caves under the temple of Apollo, and they would use their dreams to descend to the goddess to get the wisdom of the goddess. But this whole process, as those of you who already are in a process like this know about the death of the ego, the death of the adapted ego, how it has to go down into the unconscious to be educated by the wisdom that comes from the depths. So another one that another quote from Philip is one I want to draw attention to. And this is where he focuses on the relationship of Mary Magdalene. And he writes, "The companion," and the Greek word for that is koinonos. And koinonos means a consort or a sexual partner or a wife. It's a very, very sacred bond between two people. He says the companion, the koinonos of the Son, is Miryam of Magdala. The teacher loved her more than all his disciples. He often kissed her on the mouth. When the disciples saw how he loved Miryam, they asked him, "Why do you love her more than us?" There's a lovely picture of let me just comment on this slide. This is a beautiful slide showing Mary Magdalene in her red robe. she often is painted with a red robe because she was a priestess in the goddess tradition. And so red would relate to the womb mysteries. Sarah and Azra Bertrand have written a lot about that. They have a book called The Magdalene Mysteries. And it's written from both a sort of scholarly and also a sort of visionary perspective, which is a really nice combination because we need both in scholarship nowadays. So here she is in her priestess robe. Now, here she's in both red and green. Sometimes she is painted in green because that would relate to her connection to the earth mysteries. So the fertility and the earth mysteries and the womb shamans, which perhaps you know of too, the great tradition of the womb shamans. Here's another one of her, again with the green and the red, and her alabaster jar. And here is a stained glass window from Montserrat Cathedral in Catalonia, northern Spain. This is the great cathedral that houses the most unbelievable Black Madonna. And if you can ever go to Montserrat to be present, she's right up there, in a prominent place, sort of above the altar. Very, very powerful experience. And if you can go to that cathedral when the choir is singing, you'll just be transported into a trans-dimensional space. That's all I can say. It's very worth doing. So here is the stained glass window of the marriage between Mary Magdalene and Joseph. And here is Magdalene teaching people in the south of France. And here is another stained glass window, more contemporary. This is from the early 20th century, I think. Again, it's from a church in Scotland. Again, we see Mary Magdalene and Jesus and the emphasis on her pregnant belly, as you can see, with the cord sort of below her tummy there. So theirs was a spiritual union as well as a sacred marriage. And kissing on the mouth also belongs to the offices of the sacred bride and groom. In the Old Testament Song of Solomon, it's a beautiful book in the Old Testament. It's really worth looking at. It's very, very short. It recounts the erotic love songs of a sovereign bride and groom. And kissing is the first entry. It's like, that's, verse 1. I think it's actually verse 2. But so it's this beautiful celebration of an erotic spiritual bond between two people. And also, so kissing is also a shared breath, so they share this deep spiritual affinity. This is what it points to. And the Alexandrian theologian Origen in AD, I don't know, in the 3rd century sometime, equated Mary Magdalene with the bride in the Old Testament Song of Songs. And St. Bernard, who was also a great devotee in the 12th century, he was head of the Knights Templars, by the way, in his sermons on the Song of Songs, celebrated Mary Magdalene in the same way, suggesting that she was joined with Jesus in a sacred marriage, as the song was considered a liturgical litany for the rites of the hieros gammus, the sacred marriage, the conjunctio of alchemy. So I think for me, part of this fascination with Jesus and were they married is this archetype of the conjunctio, of the holy wedding, of the sacred, in the longing for unity, in this, we're still in the midst of absolute unspeakable horrors as we sit here. But at the same time, there is an enormous cry of the heart from people with their demonstrations around the world to stop the nonsense, to stop this as being some way of solving something. But grievously it goes on. But what I'm trying to say is that there is a longing for peace and unity. And I think that is the archetype of the conjunctio that's constellated in our time. So Mary Magdalene and Jesus was connected with the royal bride. The text actually goes back to the story of Inanna. So again, back to Mesopotamia, back to Sumer, and her beloved Dumuzi, or Tammuz. Okay, so and so it's a beautiful invitation, if you like, to bring love and consciousness into all our relations. It's supportive of that notion, because it's so hard to be in relationship if you're not also focusing on who you are, you know, in your wholeness apart from your partner. It's just absolutely essential. And it's a difficult task, as we all know, excruciatingly difficult at times, of course. Okay. Actually, it reminds me also of a saying of Jesus in the letters somewhere. He writes, "The living mystery of life is always hidden between two, and it is the true mystery which cannot be betrayed by words and depleted by arguments." I love that. I think that's really beautiful. It's the idea that between is a presence, is a third, is a spirit, is a dove that somehow is connected to the union. And there's one other saying, and that's from the Gospel of Thomas, which you're probably quite familiar with, which is, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. And so here these are quite tough sayings. It's saying basically, I think, that conscious effort on behalf of the evolution of your consciousness and value is basically why you're here. That's the job of being human, to move your incarnational travels along, as it were. Okay, there are many other sayings, but what I'll do is I'll post the full, the full document on my website sometime after the talk. I do want to say something about Jesus and the Essenes, because this is important. They would have been part of this community. Again, the Essenes originated in Egypt, but again, they had communities in Palestine, Egypt. There was a center at Qumran, where I was floating in the Dead Sea. And then there's another center that if you go to the Essene.com site, there's an essay called The Nazarenes of Mount Carmel. And Claire Hartsong, if you know her, she's written a beautiful book called Anna, Grandmother of Jesus. And she calls herself a celestial historian. It's how, through deep introversion, she brought forth a very, very touching story about how she imagines that whole unfolding. And what she says is that basically the Mount Carmel Center, she says Jesus and Mary Magdalene and their whole group lived there. It was basically a mystery school whose origin lies in the temple traditions of Egypt, and who followed the way of the teacher of righteousness, in other words, the right use of energy. They were mystics and shamans, teachers, healers, and their particular focus was a devotion to bringing forth a Messiah, the anointed one, the Christ, to planet Earth. And Anna led this community for a long time, passing, as she says, the light codes, the Grail codes of the celestial spheres, the higher consciousness, through initiations and light conception and birth practices and upbringing, both to help people realize their own Christ consciousness within themselves, that illumination is possible in this life and not some future time or place. And that is the emphasis on this living testimony, that you can do it here. You don't need to wait. It's like that saying, you can resurrect first and then you just, you die, you move on, you transition. But don't wait don't wait for the future. In other words, whatever the future is. And let's see, not keeping up. This is a picture of the dove, a stone carving, as it were, in a town called Merv, just north of here, which sort of is evocative of the Holy Spirit. So I want to come back to my dream, the dream of the Grail Chalice, arising out of the ocean. After I had this dream, it actually propelled me out of sleep. And the first thought I had was Mary Magdalene and her jar and her, her sacred vessel, her anointing jar. And I think that was because we'd been for a month in Italy before this, and we'd been to Assisi, and we'd been in Perugia, and I'd seen so many paintings and frescoes of Mary Magdalene and the Grail and her, see, I'm doing it now, and her cup. But I also thought of Aphrodite arising out of the sea. Somehow the image reminded me of that. And of course, I thought about the legends of the Grail. So Mary Magdalene and the Grail, for me, were connected right off the bat. They've always been connected for me. It was only later when I started reading all this material that I realized that that's been true for a lot of people, her connection to the Grail, particularly in the Middle Ages, because it's sort of important. And Lawrence Gardner points this out, because he says what was originally the San Graal, the Holy Blood, became the Sang Real. What was originally the Sang Royal, I can't say it, Royal, became the San Graal. So with the Middle Age Grail stories, that's his point, that the original Holy Blood, in fact, did get connected to the Grail. And of course, there's a book by that title. And the interesting thing about this dream was that it took place, we stayed in Genoa overnight, and the next day we were going into the Languedoc region of France. And that was important for me because the Languedoc region, the southwest, called the last corner actually, the southwest corner was part of northern Spain up until about the 14th century. And it was an absolute cultural hotbed for 200 years, between the 11th and the 13th centuries. So first of all, there are so many legends of Mary Magdalene being here, that she landed in Provence, but maybe went up the Rhine, maybe went to England, but came back down into the Languedoc area. So it's filled with legends, churches and chapels devoted to her. But also, this area was the center of the Cathar Holy Spirit movement as well, who followed Jesus and Mary's teachings, and whose main symbols were the Grail and the dove. They wouldn't have anything to do with the institutional church, which they felt was really corrupt. Their teaching was based on spiritual growth and service, based in initiatory practices that relate again to the sacred marriage, and a rite called the consolamentum. This is an initiation designed to produce a visionary and revelatory knowing, sourced in the deep waters of love and peace. And I've been fortunate to have met some members of the tradition and was given that initiation. The Cathars were spiritual adepts and seers. They were shamanic practitioners and healers, just like the Essenes. And again, tradition, part of the, like the Essenes, part of, like the Gnostic Gospels, part of the death rebirth process of the path to the opened heart. So, but they were, and this is just so horrifying. They therefore were a threat to the church, and so they were brutally extinguished by the Catholic Church and the French government. And by the mid-13th century, they were virtually eradicated. Of course, some of them escaped. And this whole area, together with northern Spain, originally called Occitanie, actually it's just come back to Occitanie now from Languedoc, was also known for the troubadours and the Knights Templar, both of whom were dedicated, devoted to Mary Magdalene. The Knights Templar, who with their wealth and esoteric secrets had the knowledge, the sacred geometry, the knowledge to build the great Cathedral of Chartres and other cathedrals in France during this period and shortly afterwards. And they, in the 14th century, were suffered persecution and again, a terrible inquisition. So this is the church basically extinguishing anyone who follows the teachings of the Gnostic Jesus and Mary Magdalene. It's just a horrific thing to even entertain. And of course, in this area, the legends of the Holy Grail, like elsewhere in France, elsewhere in Europe and England, everybody knew about these tales. So let me move on now to the Grail. Might have to skip. No, quite now. I'm just check on the time. See how I'm doing with the time. Okay. The Grail. So it's the object of a profound search. It's hidden and there's no one way to find it. Some don't find it. You're either called, which means basically you're struck by the numinosity of the Grail symbol, or you have to be found worthy in order to find it. This is described in all the various texts on the Grail. It's an object, or alternatively, it's a spiritual value that may involve a vision of the Grail. It's guarded by an order of knights, now we would say ladies, or rather women too, who together form a secret and invisible, what's called an ecclesia spiritualis, a secret church. It's a path that seeks initiation into the secrets of our relationship with the divine and the cosmic source of our being. It's related to the tree of life. It's a code relating to the giving and receiving of service. So you can see so many traditions emphasize different aspects of this Grail story. This always happens when an archetype is constellated because people are drawn to it, but they all tell their own tales of it. So it's wonderful in that way because there's such a plethora and variety of understanding. And this is the sort of Aquarian thing where people sit around the table and they share their own experiences. There's no one belief system anymore, which is fantastic. Everyone can rely on their own experiences. And this is what is constantly, when an archetype constellates, that's what happens. Many symbols, start to gather around it. But the key symbols, so that's what I'm going to focus on, are the chalice and the stone. The chalice and the stone. So as a chalice, it's linked to Jesus' blood at the Last Supper, or the chalice of the womb of Mary Magdalene. But it's always related to the ancient symbol of the vessel, which is considered a life-giving or healing cauldron, inspiring strength or wisdom, or dispensing grace. It's a symbol of the heart, a tomb of initiation. In my dream, I was struck by the suspension, as it were, of the cup between the upper world of spirit and the world of water and earth below, as if the chalice represented this love bond between spirit and matter. Now I would say that central place of mystery between two opposites, Jung calls it the unus mundus world, that is the realm of psychoid phenomena as well. This is in my Songlines book. I tried to write about this, how in that psychoid dimension, there is another dimension of consciousness that's coming forward. One of the best examples of it are near-death experiences, because people literally go traveling in another world and glean all sorts of things which they absolutely know to be true when they come back, and then they talk about it. And there's a huge number of people doing that. There's some really good books on it. But anyway, it's this between space, between two, the living mystery, between spirit and matter, the living mystery. What's in that living mystery? What is that? Well, it's the chalice of the Grail as well as many, many other things. So I was impacted by this profound sense of a sacred mystery emanating from the vision that seemed to point to the deepest secrets of the soul. And this elusive sight for me also hinted at the Aquarian water bearer of the new eon, the waters of wisdom rising up from below, even though it doesn't really look like it if we read the news. But in so many individuals it is. Okay, as a stone, the quest for the Grail is a journey beset with initiatory trials and tests in search of the healing elixir and mystery of life. Now, Wolfram wrote one of the best texts on this, and Lindsay Clark in our time wrote a beautiful, here's the Grail as a kind of numinous mystery in the middle of the Table of the Knights. Parsifal, he wrote a version of Wolfram's Parsifal, and he calls it his Parsifal. And I just so highly recommend reading this book. It's a beautiful reimagining, but using all the essence of Wolfram's work. It's just wonderful. So I'm just going to do a little synopsis of the story, because you'll see how, well, I'll say at the end. And this tale, so in his tale, the Grail is a stone. The tale takes place in this kind of a between place, the dreamscape of imaginal reality. It involves the story of Parsifal on his way to becoming a knight, a tale of an innocent whose focus on fighting and conquest leaves a trail of grieving women and broken hearts of which he is oblivious. There is a wounded fisher king who has a wound to his groin, and therefore, one can only imagine, to sexual love and to eros. And it all takes place in a wasteland, a land where the earth is laid waste by war and greed, and the Grail is lost, or at least obscured. Essentially the situation we're in today, as you can see. There is a loathly lady. I love this, loathly lady. There is a loathsome female, symbol of the dark and neglected feminine, a feisty and learned, old and boar-faced hag named Kundry. I love her character. When Parsifal arrives at the court of King Arthur to be knighted, Kundry steps in and says, "You think you're so great with all your conquests and leaving grieving women behind." She says, "You're a nothing. You're just lower than the lowest." And of course, he's so humiliated in the middle of Arthur's court. He has to go off again and try again to find the Grail. So, in addition, when he goes on his way, he meets a wise hermit monk. Trevisan is his name. And these two figures who live on the wilderness edge of society provide the power source of transformation to this tale. Excuse me. They sort of represent the solitary archetypal figures of the wise old woman, excuse me, getting carried away. The wise old, hang on a minute, woman and man, who unflinchingly and unsentimentally challenge Parsifal to the necessity of heart and soul values beyond the ambitions of the ego, the self-involved ego. So they challenge him in sort of scathing ways, as only a sort of shaman elder can, on the limitations of their choices, of his choices and attitudes, and the fact that they've only caused suffering to women. So one of the central themes of the tale is that the search for knighthood and conquest must be surrendered to the development of the capacity for compassion and the values of the heart. This is where we're on this edge today. When are we going to make this shift? In the tale, it involves asking the right question, which is, what ails thee? What ails thee? A question that by its very nature expresses the compassion it seeks to convey. And it's not only the knights who are ruled by the power principle of willful conquest. Some of the female characters have to face their power-driven qualities and hidden wounds in order to find love too. In this version of the story, the Grail is a stone that fell from heaven, and in which the opposing powers of light and darkness eventually reconciled in creative tension. The stone is described as lapis exilis, insignificant or uncomely stone, as he writes. In Clarke's Parsifal, the problem of facing our shadows is viewed from a generational point of view, which in therapy you have to look at the generations, because often you inherit their issues, but also a cosmic one. There was a war in heaven when the forces of dark rose against the powers of light and the cosmos was torn apart. But a group of angels wouldn't take sides, and these guardians of the Grail came to earth to protect the stone of healing that holds both the light and the dark together, that which makes life whole again, and from which all earthly bounty flows. The splits found within, between, down the generations, in our shadow projections, both personal and cultural, in our broken connection to nature and broken bond with Earth's relationship to the cosmos, all contribute to our wasteland. And this must change if we are to survive, because if we don't, we will just be sloughed off by the earth. If we are to restore the Grail, we have to attend both personally and collectively to these issues. So again, you see this 12th century tale, a period of 200 years where the force of love came bursting through from the collective unconscious, seeking yet again, can humans get this message about the importance of relationship to ourselves, to each other, between men and women, between opposites, between cultures? When are we going to learn this? And of course, through the ages, there have been individuals, shamans, mystics from East and West, ordinary individuals, artists, scientists, that have made this lonely road to seek this kind of healing, often in great peril to themselves. scientists were burned at the stake as well as witches. I mean, it seems absurd now. It doesn't even compute. Anyway, we each have to obviously go through our own death rebirth process, but some people are amazingly active and fiercely loving about contributing to the ending of all the nonsense that continues to go on. It's really evil that's let loose upon the world at the moment, it seems. In any event, I daren't think that these heartbreaking wars are yet another ruthless message. I can't bear even to really go like that. It seems we just don't get it, no matter how many there are. But it is an urgent question. And are we asking the right questions? This is what the Grail says. It's the questions, it's the asking of the questions. Love the questions, as Rilke says. So, whom does the Grail serve is a question. What do women want is a question. And they're taken up in the tales. We wade through the waters of the development and then limitations of this warring, heroic ego. And grieving losses, and this is what we have to try at least to do, to face the mistakes, to embrace our vulnerability on the way toward the very difficult task of opening our hearts. And in this story, there's even a healing of Muslim and Christian, because Parsifal has a half brother that he doesn't know about until the end of this tale, when they're fighting to the death, and suddenly they recognize each other. They have the same father but different mothers. Firfit's had a black queen, as it says, and Parsifal's was a white queen. So they represent these polar opposites, and they embrace toward the end. And I think I have a picture of, I found this picture of, from the East, of course, there are Grail stories from the East, and Corbin writes about the Grail stories from the East. Absolutely fascinating, his perspective. So at the end of the tale, with the memory of his lonely path, that's Parsifal, to acknowledge his own suffering, which he does do, finally asks this, first of all, after he heals the sort of shadow projection, shall we say, simplistically, of his half-brother Firfit's, he can only then, after he's done that, he arrives at the Grail Castle for the second time. The first time he doesn't ask the question, and so all the abundance in the Grail just disappears. It's like nothing happened, and he has to go off on his way. But after, in the last part of the story, after he heals the relationship with his brother, his half-brother, he's finally ready to ask the suffering Fisher King, Anfortas, what ails thee? And with the question finally being asked, the miracle of healing begins and creates a luminous presence all around. Réponse de joie, the Grail bearer, enters, holding between her hands a silver chalice in which gleamed the stone. Here both chalice and stone form the radiance of the Grail, and the stone, shimmering magically with both light and dark, leads Parsifal to marvel at how these healing symbols point to all of nature. I love this, all of nature. And he experiences the spiritual quality of matter that Jung talks about in his synchronicity principle, that guides us on our journeys through life. Nature also becomes unified with the healing of the Grail, unified with us, unified with the whole. And I just thought I'd put this picture of a crop circle from 2 years ago, which was dubbed the Grail. There are 12 Grail cups around it. And I actually talk that summer, wrote my paper on this crop circle and the myth of the Grail. And that talk is up on my website if you're interested. I just thought that was remarkable, that symbol, at least that's what it was to me, and it was to a lot of other people. I just thought that was so exquisite, kind of mandala wheel. So the restoration of the spirit of nature, anima mundi as it used to be called, soul of the one world behind this world, is perhaps what restores the Grail. Not, as Kundry suggests at one point, as a thing to be found or an absence to be mourned, but a presence, this idea of presence, patiently waiting our attention. Perhaps the restoration of the Grail is an experience of the fathomless mysteries of life that restores our connection to the sacred. Because once that happens, it's much more difficult to do harm. Okay, now I'm going to go on to the Rose Path. This is a sketch at one point that my daughter gave me. She's an artist living near Barcelona. So, with my Chalice dream, because it was such a sort of numinous symbol, I felt that I had to find ways of how it might be more personally connected with me. Because otherwise it was just, what a great experience, which it was, but I needed to know why was that given to me? And so I did some Jung calls them active imaginations. I call them active imaginations. I do shamanic journeying as well, as ways to enter the dream time and to find out more about things. On my first shamanic journey on the dream, Mary Magdalene appeared. And I was actually really shocked. I wasn't thinking anything. I just said, can help me understand the Grail, or something like that, please. Can the great wisdom from the depths please help me understand this symbol, what I'm supposed to glean from it? And that's what happened. She appeared, and I received a message from her. She said, follow the blue rose, follow the tradition of the blue rose. That's all she said, and she just disappeared. That was it. So this had a strange effect on me. It set up this kind of vibrational field of recognition in my body, but I had no idea what she was talking about. So I found a few references online at that time. I couldn't find very many, but they didn't resonate with me at all. So I did a number of these kinds of dialogues with Mary, and she told me many things. And I think I'll wait to just, because of time, I want to come more specifically to what I want to talk about in relation to the Blue Rose tradition today, because things happened this year that helped me move it forward a bit. But I do want to say that when I was in Egypt, and I see Hardy on the call, which is wonderful to see you, Hardy, because you and I were at Abydos together undergoing these extraordinary initiations. But what was very interesting to me about that was that whenever I would go to the Isis temple, because we were working with an Egyptian shaman, basically, to do the meditations, often Mary would come in with Isis. So for me, I learned a lot about that, because we also did sound meditations and healings. And there is this connection, in fact, between Mary and Isis, Mary Magdalene and Isis. And sound healing techniques, which we were exposed to as well. Anyway, that's sort of another story, but I wanted to mention that. But a few days ago, this is what I want to talk about. So there were many things she told me about the tradition, but I'm going to get very specific on this recent one. I just came into my study. I wasn't thinking. It was sort of early in the morning. I was probably thinking, how can I reduce my talk or something like that? But I was just I hadn't sort of got with it yet. And I just picked up an old journal I wasn't even thinking, it was mindless. And I just let it fall open to a page. And what came out of this old journal was an entry that I made in early November of 2016, just a few months after my dream. And in this meditation, Mary Magdalene and Jesus appeared and handed me the chalice of the Grail. In the vision or in the dialogue, it's gold and imbued with precious stones and crystals. They say that the cup draws the water of life from the depths and the teachings of transformation and healing. And also they added, let the tree of life ascend through its center and open its branches to the spirit realm above, and let the sacred serpent surround its base. So they were surrounded by sort of ancestral guides, and they demonstrated this sort of meditation posture that the body can be like a Grail cup, or like a tree. The sort of sacred staff of the shaman type of thing. And in that meditation, just to imagine bringing, the higher vibrational frequencies down into the body, while at the same time you're drawing up earth energies. And this is a very common, in fact, meditation practice that shamans often speak about. And it's a way of situating yourself in the body, as some people call it, a walking star, as a walking star between the spirit realms and matter. So that's what you're carrying as an initiate on the path. Okay, and then she adds at the end, the sign of this vision is the blue rose of wisdom. The blue rose of wisdom. So this, the blue rose of wisdom, the blue rose of wisdom, a symbol of the wisdom teachings of the alchemical transformation, where this is her continuing, where the inner becomes outer the inner, the above the below the above. And then she concludes, eventually you'll find a chalice in the real world, but don't worry about it. It will find you. This is back in 2016. Now, a Grail cup did in fact come to me. This is the little tiny metal Grail cup that was on the notice on the picture. I took a picture of it in the summer next to a pot of flowers. But here I was trying to demonstrate to my brother how tiny it was, so I sent him this on a text. It came to me in Egypt, in Cairo, where I was in March. I was standing outside an oils manufacturer, and it was before we went to visit a Coptic church with paintings of Mary Magdalene with her head on Jesus' shoulder. These absolutely exquisite paintings of that scene, the Last Supper or the wedding feast, I don't know which it is. This sweet cup was lying in the gutter, very near the back of a wheel of a bus. I couldn't help seeing how this precious sacred cup, left in the gutter, seemed to be a symbol of the rejected and devalued, the stone that Jung describes when building his tower, which was the wrong size, but which he knew was his. He cites an alchemist who says of the stone, the more it is despised by fools, the more loved by the wise. Then he inscribes on the stone, this is at Bowlingham, where his country house is, and lets the stone speak of itself. This is what the stone says of itself. I am an orphan, alone, nevertheless found everywhere. In woods and mountains I roam, yet am hidden in the innermost soul of man. Here again is the Grail myth and alchemy, my little cup and the stone of alchemy that immediately I thought of when I was writing this down. It reminded me of the rejected Mary Magdalene, the rejected and devalued parts of all of us that hopefully can be lovingly and courageously faced to become seeds of gold in the heart. And here's a beautiful Botticelli Derelicta It's really Mary Magdalene, who was rejected by the church and basically for 2,000 years, with exceptions, as we are learning. So, and it also kind of, the little cut reminded me of this sense of the descriptions of the Grail, where its hiddenness is one of its major characteristics. And even in its presence as a numinous spiritual quality can really only be seen with eyes that see. That's a phrase that's repeated a lot of times in the Beloved Companion. You know, those with eyes to see and ears to hear. You've got to have a certain attunement. It's not just hearing something, it's an attunement to something. It's not just seeing something, it's seeing through the eyes of vision, of mystical vision. And then, earlier this year, quite by accident, I was looking for an alchemical image for another talk, and the page fell open to a picture of the blue rose of alchemy. I'd never heard of this before. I asked Jungian friends of mine, and they hadn't either. So the blue rose of alchemy, it's extraordinary. The text reads, from the root to the tail-eating serpent, you can see it at the bottom here, the Ouroboros, will sprout roses, the supreme good. So the Ouroboros, the tail-eating serpent, is basically the symbol of unity, both material and spiritually, which perpetually change in a cycle of destruction and regeneration. So out of that sort of unity, if you like, these three roses appear. The white rose signifies the lunar philosophical tincture, the red rose, the solar metallic tincture. The mysterious blue rose in the middle is called the flower of wisdom, Phlos sapientiae. It goes further. Blue is not given any autonomous significance in the alchemical color theories. It generally signifies a moist state of matter and is treated as a modification of the Saturnine black, the sign of high spirituality and arcane knowledge. Needless to say, this struck me hugely, and I'm still contemplating it. I'd certainly never heard of this blue rose of alchemy. Of course, the usual black, white, yellow, and red, representing stages of the work, but not blue. And so, here again are these sort of hints about this blue rose path, and I felt I needed to follow the trail. So, reflecting on this mystery and my Egyptian little cup, my gift, I felt, was given to me. One day, soon after I turned home in March, I was walking alone when a voice in the wind, as it were, said, "The Grail leads to the stars." I wondered what this meant exactly. Did it mean that it leads to some kind of celestial consciousness? The alchemists speak of the imagination in this way. They say imagination is the star in man, the celestial or super-celestial body. The imagination as a true imagination is one of the most important elements in the alchemical art of transformation. It is to be distinguished from the ego-driven fantasies and relates more to deeply held soul values, and so uncover the guiding wisdom beneath the surface of our lives. Together with this soul imagination, the adept or the soror, the adept or the sister, is to meditate in facilitating his or her initiations. And this is the meditatio, and this is a dialogue that you have with an invisible guide. So your process is a combination of using the power of the imagination, together with the help of your guide, to transform the lead of unconsciousness to the goal of enlightenment. And in this way, you help facilitate the creation of the resurrection body, the celestial eye, as the Sufis call it. This is what you take with you when you transition out of this envelope. And Mary Magdalene describes this too in her vision, which I will read to you in a minute. Now, I just want to quickly say something about the Grail and alchemy, because in Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, his visionary autobiography, Jung records several dreams that relate to Grail themes. For him, the Grail was very much linked to alchemy and the quest for the philosopher's stone. Here we are with the stone again, the lapis, which is one of the major symbols of alchemy, of course. Jung felt the mystery of both alchemical Grail tradition the mystery of both alchemical and Grail traditions related to unsolved problems in the Christian story and its inability to evolve over time. The wounded fisher king, with a wound that won't heal, was, he says, a Christian suffering related to the imitatio Christi, a religion of belief and blind acceptance, which never leads to a solution of suffering, he claims. Rather than the attempt to discover the Christ within, or psychologically speaking, that treasure, that we call it the God image, but that doesn't evoke the feeling side of it for me. It's the treasure within. So the divine, if you like, within one's own psyche. This, of course, takes our participation. And it's aided by, the dreams and the visions, the synchronicities, the suffering, the illnesses, all the things that happen go into this pot of transformation. And so he felt that alchemy and the Grail, both traditions, belonged together and sought to address unsolved problems, such as the problem of opposites, shadow material, sexuality, the unconscious in general, the nature of love, and the repressed feminine. These are the unspoken issues in the underbelly of Christianity that were rising to the surface in the 12th to 13th centuries of the Middle Ages and remain psychologically problematical to this day. And we have seen this in Wolfram's Tale. Emma Jung's life work was devoted to the Grail, and she never wrote it down, but von Franz wrote it down. And I just want to say that their amplification of the symbols of the Grail legend are absolutely unparalleled, and it's a beautiful work to read. They don't mention Mary Magdalene's relationship to the Grail, but they do stress the feminine nature of the Grail and recognize the need to include the soul of nature. Anyway, it's a very good text. Jung observed that mystical alchemy offered a symbolic template for his psychology of individuation or self-realization, essentially becoming who you really are, not who you think you are. Like the Gnostics in the early centuries, alchemy as the art of transformation portrayed a path whose aim was to discover the God image in the psyche, or the self, as Jung calls it. In alchemy, the lapis or gold. This image took varying forms, and as I've said many times, is quite unique for each person. He speaks of finding one's myth, a story that gives life deep meaning. But the main point is that the journey relies on one's own experience, not on any kind of belief or dogma, and the dreams, visions, and so on along the way. The path aims to transform the flawed into something lasting value by working on the wounded and rejected parts to gather the great value hidden within. And these are often symbolized by these archetypal images that have this numinous, this energetic and sacred nature. And as we've seen, Wolfram's Tale mirrored this. And both Jung and the alchemical mystics use the image of the tree for this unfolding growth. So let us now move to Mary Magdalene's vision at the end of this gospel. It's quite unique. So Mary Magdalene describes the following vision. First of all, Yeshua describes to her a tree of life rooted in the earth, which is our bodies, and reaching up to the heavens, realm of spirit. This eternal tree, if you climb it, offers illumination. The ascent is through the chakras, moving from one branch to another. There are 8 branches, each with its blessings and its challenges, and 7 gates and guardians who challenge the unworthy as they try to pass. Mary Magdalene, seeing the visionary tree, feels her soul beginning to ascend. So now she is experiencing the tree and not just seeing it. The first bough is love and compassion, and the challenge is to be free of judgment and wrath. The second is wisdom and understanding, with its shadow of ignorance and intolerance. The third bears the fruit of honor and humility, when we can be free of duplicity and arrogance. The fourth bough blossoms with strength and courage, and challenges us to free ourselves from the weakness of the flesh and to confront the illusion of our fears. The fifth bough, the hardest of all, challenges you to reject the deceiver, to attain the clarity and truth of your soul, and to realize that you are a child of the living spirit. As Mary Magdalene continues to ascend, the voice of the world slowly disappears, and she enters the silence. At the sixth bough, knowing her true self, she was able to partake of the fruit of power and healing, the power to heal your own soul, and therefore to prepare it for the next step, the seventh bough, where Mary Magdalene, now free of all darkness, is filled with the light and goodness of the Spirit. In this state, she's permeated with a fierce joy of that, as her soul dissolves in the flames. Flying upwards, Jesus shows her the eighth and final bough, upon which burned the fruit of the grace and beauty of the Spirit. Now she dissolves and vanishes in a brilliant light like the sun, and she beholds a woman of extraordinary beauty, clothed in garments of brilliant white. Mary Magdalene continues, "The figure extended its arms, and I felt my soul drawn into its embrace. And in that moment, I was free from the world, and I realized that the fetter of forgetfulness was temporary." I love that. The fetter of forgetfulness was temporary. She knows she will remain in the silence for the duration of the age. And then, as if from afar, Yeshua calls to her, "Miryam, whom I have called the Magdala. Now you have seen the all and have known the truth of yourself, the truth that is I am. Now you have become the completion of completions," and the vision ends. She tells the disciples that everything that she has received, because they asked her about what things happened with Yeshua that they weren't privy to. And she tells them and says that it's true, but they don't believe her, with the exception of Matthew. In any event, she completes the gospel by saying that she is Miryam, the Magdala, which means tower, the beloved companion. So it was as if she had fulfilled that kind of celestial eye, which for her was a goddess, which I think is quite beautiful. Maybe it was Sophia, maybe it was Isis, who knows? So this is the great conjunctio, the sacred marriage of alchemy. Then, of course, we have to come back into ordinary life and find ways of living the inner secret, even in the midst of great difficulty. This is a huge challenge. So the tree of her vision is the tree of life, the center of the world, axis mundi. And since ancient Sumer and Egypt was associated with the great goddess who symbolized the inexhaustible source of creation, in Betty Kovac's words from Merchants of Light, it was rooted in the waters of the invisible, unmanifest world out of which it emerged into time and space. It reflected the processes of life, death, renewal, Mystics and shamans of all ages have experienced this cosmic tree. We perhaps know it from the Kabbalah. Alchemists also have the image of the tree for the completion of the work. That was just a focus figure of the blue rose. There's a sketch my daughter gave me. Here is the philosopher's tree. For me, the Grail chalice is also a symbol for this tree, as Mary Magdalene indicated several years ago. A relationship with it is our birthright. The destruction of the goddess was a way of separating us from this birthright, from our relationship to the mysteries of life and to cosmic awakening. Mary Magdalene in her life and through her blue rose wisdom has returned this gift to us. She's part of the great awakening happening on our planet and in our hearts today. So to complete my talk, I will just give a brief excerpt from a Gnostic text where Sophia speaks of herself and where the Grail chalice dream out of the waters also comes to mind, together with Mary as mistress of the waters, as she was called in Languedoc. We read, I am the voice speaking softly. I dwell within the silence, and I shone down upon the darkness. It is I who poured forth the water. I am the one hidden within radiant waters. I am the image of the invisible spirit. I am the womb that gives shape to the all by giving birth to the light that shines in splendor. Thank you.
Beautiful presentation, Veronica. Do you want to unshare your screen?
I do. Yes, I very much want to unshare.
Have
if I can find where to do it. Let's see, how do I unshare?
Stop share. There should be a button.
The red. Yeah, there we go.
Okay, great. So to start us off, well, a lot of my questions were answered in your presentation, but
oh well, we can talk about something else.
No.
Or if there are any you want to, well, go ahead. Yeah.
So what would you say? Well, one question I have, which is just a kind of a silly question, probably, but in
the questions
gospel,
are silly.
in the gospel of the beloved companion,
yeah,
she always refers to, like when she addresses Yeshua, she addresses him as Rabboni. You would think if she were his wife, it seems like a very formal way to address your husband, even if he is also your teacher.
Yeah.
Do you have thoughts on that?
No, only that sort of emphasis on teacher. The tradition, they don't call themselves Cathars. The tradition is very clear that in their understanding that of this text, that Miryam and Yeshua are actually co-equal spiritual teachers. He never describes himself in this gospel as the Son of God. He's always the Son of humanity.
Right.
He's human. And I can't answer that question specifically, but that's how I know they understand their roles. And we don't know what he calls her Miryam. So yeah, perhaps it's a title of respect. I'm not sure how to answer that.
Yeah, I guess it would be.
And also because she's writing about him also a lot, and also not her teachings when she came to France and started teaching and so on. But she would have carried on the tradition for sure of the teachings and the initiations and this secret inner life that is the true kingdom of in biblical terms, the kingdom of heaven within. It's an inner journey. So it's just like it's just like alchemy, or it's just like Jung's individuation in a way. And that's why I love that vision at the end, because at every bough, the challenge too, you could just take that tree and you could spend a whole course just looking at the boons and the challenges, because it involves shadow material at every stage. And that's why I love it so much. It's not just, a spiritual ascent without any darkness. And that's why I think it's so important, because darkness is of Sophia. Darkness is when you close your eyes and you meditate and you go in where it's dark, because you try to get the world distractions, put them aside for a while and go and hear, what the spirits are saying, what the soul is saying, basically. Right. And of course, it's a massive challenge, as we all know.
Right. Was Philip her brother? I read somewhere that
Lazarus. Lazarus was her brother.
No, yeah, that's right. Lazarus was her brother.
Yeah.
Right. But not, so Philip, the Gospel of Philip, that was not a brother also.
No, he was another disciple.
Okay, somewhere I heard that, but I think it was in this documentary called oh geez, what's the name of it? Something about the tomb of Jesus. I don't know if you've seen that. I'll send you the link. Yeah, it's very interesting. Anyway, okay, so we have some questions in the chat. Oh, Jenna Paulden raised her hand. Go ahead, Jenna, and I'll open the chat and find the other questions while you're.
All right.
So just
hello.
Hello.
Oh, Veronica, my dear, I heard you with a young woman that was doing, I can't think of her name, but you spoke of your vision several months ago, and that led me to buy your book and tune in to what you're about. You are truly a sister of the rose. I know that in my heart. And I've also read the book, the Magdalene Mysteries, that you referred to, with the colors. So, and then you mentioned that in the Languedoc, in the Occitan, that Mary is referred to as the mistress of the waters. And I'm thinking of the blue rose. I'm a sister of the rose myself, and I'm just wondering. I'll riff on it myself, but there's this connection then between that color of the blue rose and the wisdom and the waters.
That's really nice.
Any other threads on the blue rose that you could share with us?
What I've learned is that it's not something that is like a template that you can teach anyone else. It's not that. It was something that was given. I don't know why. I have literally followed the crumbs through the forest. I've let it guide me. I have moved to France. My husband and I moved to France on account of that. I led my pilgrimages based on my dialogues with her, because at one point she said, well, what we're talking about isn't yours. You need to share it. So that's why I do. Because, and the pilgrimages were a great way to do that as well. And we had challenges and a lot of fun doing them. And then COVID put a stop to that. So I don't know if I'll do that again or not. I might next year. But I think it was just something that I've followed and I continue to follow. And now it's taken me into alchemy. And it's just these synchronicities. I just pay attention to them. And so when that sweet little chalice appeared in the gutter, I knew it was mine. It was like young in the stone. I knew it was mine. I mean, I did look around to see if someone had dropped it, but I didn't look too hard. But I mean, she had said just fortuitously, I picked up the thing where she said, you'll be given one, and there you won't have to look for it. I did actually get another one at Chalice Well Gardens, which I love as well. But this was the one that I didn't look for. It came to me, and that's what she said. And so it's an enormous treasure. I take it with me everywhere. It's just so sweet. It's just
and
so
it has roses.
Has roses on it, and it has hearts on it.
Yes, I love it.
Yes,
Well,
I imagine it as a child, or maybe some person carried it when they traveled. I don't know. I just hope they know I'm looking after it. Whoever dropped it, I'm looking after it.
yes, beautiful. I had one little crumb myself that was kind of given in terms of the blue and the throat chakra, and being a metaphor. Not only was the anointing part of it, but I do believe the sacred voice, the chanting, the sound was a quality. So that was just another little crumb that I followed.
Blue like that has a huge mythology attached to it, and I've actually written about it. I haven't done anything with it, but I looked into it because I was so curious about this blue. I mean, it's my favorite color. Since a child, I loved blue. I had a blue velvet, a doll with a blue velvet dress, and I loved this doll, So it's something that has just stayed with me. So I guess it's a color that speaks to me, and it speaks to me not only of the throat chakra, but also of the Pleiades.
Mm-hmm. And Sirius as well.
And Sirius too, yeah. And she did talk about the connection to particularly Sirius and the Pleiades, yeah.
Thank you.
Sharon Bringleson asks, are you acquainted with the writing of Lars Muhl, M-U-H-L, Muhl?
Oh, absolutely. His own manuscript. Yes, that was a book I read several years ago. That actually is a wonderful text. Yes, I can't see who I'm speaking.
It's on the chat. It's in the chat.
Oh, it's in the chat. Okay.
Probably has her
indeed, I do know the 3 volumes in that manuscript. What I can do is I've got such a sort of long reference list at this point of all kinds of books, channel material, novels, all these things. When I put my talk up, I will add the references.
Okay, great. That answers the next question. So
let's. Oh, okay. Good. Yes.
It says,
as thorough as I can, anyway. Yeah.
Chloe says, I would love to know Veronica's perspective around the connection between Isis and Mary Magdalene and their lineage. Is Magdalene an emanation of Isis, or a Magdalene Isis priestess of the Rose Mysteries, a branch of the Isis lineage? Many thanks.
Well, that's a very interesting question. I was so intrigued. I just have to tell you my experience of that. I was so intrigued by the fact that, we were given things we had to do in this mystery school that we were at Abydos. We were there for 2 months, and so it was quite a long haul, believe me. But anyway, there's 2 Isis chapels in the Temple of Abydos. There's a very small one where I had a very powerful experience in 2010, and that's what brought me back to Abydos in 21, 2 years ago. But there was also and then there's a larger Isis chapel in the Abydos temple, but it's the very small one that I really like. But where you stay when you do the work is very near the temple. It's called the House of Life. And there are 2 chapels that they've built in there too. One is an Isis chapel and one is a Horus chapel. And I was so intrigued by every time I went into, every time is an exaggeration, I'm sure, but many times when I would go to any of those chapels to meditate, often Mary Magdalene was right there. So eventually I asked the guide, our Egyptian priest guide, shaman guide, and I said, every time I try to meditate with Isis, Mary Magdalene comes comes along, comes to. And I said, do you have anything to say about that? And his response was, they are of the same soul essence. That was his response. And I think when I think of Egypt and the Magdalene's connection with Egypt, which is something I mentioned, I'm very, very interested in the connections between, the Palestine of the 1st century and the Egyptian tradition, which of course is a star culture. It doesn't separate spirit and nature. It's one of the most transformative places you can just go to. It's just cosmos in stone is basically what it is. And each temple is different and aligned with different chakras of the body. And so it's a huge initiation to go to Egypt. So I think of them now as of the same essence. And I think that's because the Isis-Osiris story is very similar to the Magdalene Jesus story. It's as if that template of, birth, death, and regeneration is also mythologically the story of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. She loved much. She grieved much. She lost her beloved, although some say he didn't die. There's quite a lot of material about that. But effectively, in a way, she did lose him. She went to France in AD 44, as I mentioned. He traveled eventually to India. And there are many traditions that say he died there, actually, in Kashmir, where there is a tomb dedicated to Jesus. So I don't really know, but I think they share a similar story. I don't know if that has anything to do with it or whether they are the essence of compassionate love and no grief. And Mary Magdalene was that too. And also she was an enlightened soul. It says this at the beginning of the gospel. It says the first paragraph. I am with him in the beginning and I am with him in the end. So she's an enlightened being when she comes in.
Yeah.
So maybe she's the physical embodiment, the actual person that Isis represented mythologically. And I think that's why Jesus came, because he had to be a human being.
He also refers to her as, as what my interpretation, I don't remember the exact words, but my interpretation was that he was saying you were also enlightened before you came into this life. I forget exactly how he says it, but he does say it. What brought her to France?
I think it was she wasn't safe anymore.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, she went to Egypt, I think, for several years. I don't know how many, but she didn't have her first child, I don't think, till... I don't know whether Anne is on the call. She knows the details more than I.
I haven't seen her. I haven't seen her. She signed up.
Yeah,
but
she might not be able to. That's fine. But what was I going to say? Oh, yes, the very fact they had these 3 children starting in AD. No, it can't have been 8 because she already had Sarah. Sarah was, I think, 12, or Tamar, Sarah. And then she had 2 children after that. So Jesus must have been alive. That's the position of Lawrence Gardner. Again, you see, there are just so many stories. I guess you go with the one that kind of works for you,
Yeah. Somebody had her hand raised. but maybe she put
I
it down
see
again.
somebody with their hand
Oh,
raised.
Virginia Apperson.
Oh,
Virginia Apperson.
Virginia.
Veronica.
Hi.
Well, thank you. I was at dinner last night with some friends and talking about the world and wondering what do we do? Is there anything? Do we just keep preaching to the choir, and how do we make a difference? And I feel like you today, as always, you've modeled for us. You bring an authority around this feminine realm that we don't have good role models. And thank you. You just you're just in a zone, and I come away again inspired. Thank you.
Sweet, Virginia. That's such a sweet thing to say. I mean, I just want to say to you, same to you. I mean, we've known each other a long time, and I just think we just each do, and we're all individual. We just do our best to do what we're called to do. And I know you do that too, in so many ways. Yeah.
Okay, Maria has a question in the chat. Is there any DNA evidence of this blood lineage?
You'd have to read Lawrence Gardner for that. He's a genealogist. He is like a dog with a bone. He goes to the ends of the earth to do his research. As a genealogist, he knows about family trees. He's like the internet of ancestry.com before it was invented. And his books are full of tables that either are hidden in the Vatican, or they're hidden in Celtic annals, or they're hidden in God knows where. Wherever it's hidden, he finds them. And you just have to make your own judgment about what you think about his work.
I would also refer you.
I don't know how to answer that.
Yeah, I would also
that really.
I would also refer you to that documentary that I mentioned. I think it's called The Secret Tomb of Jesus, but I can double check that. Because and I don't know how true this is, but it's this documentary where they unearth this tomb that they think was where Yeshua was buried, and Miryam of Magdala, and at least one of their sons, and they did do DNA testing. They tested to make sure they weren't brother or sister, because they said that for her to be buried in the same tomb, if this is true, would indicate that she had to be either a spouse or a sister, or a mother, which obviously she wasn't. And so they tested to see if there was a blood relationship. And they said, no, there wasn't. So that indicated that she must be the spouse. Now, I've heard that she was buried maybe in France. I don't know, but it's a fascinating documentary. And
what I love about this is that we still live in such a materialistic, scientific
right.
It's now we want proof of these things.
I know.
And somehow if we get the blood right, we can believe the story. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know how to say it. We're talking about, that's why I say legends, stories, mythical images, stories that are true from the soul's point of view. Are they literally true? Does it matter?
Right.
But for me, it's what speaks to you in your heart.
Yes.
Where does your heart go? Yes, that feels right. Mm-hmm. Does it matter to me that she had children and this, that, and went to France, and apparently she is in fact buried in France. I don't know how to say. I think we have to respond. If you ask yourself the question, perhaps, why are you on this call? What are you hoping for? What are you longing for? What is the question that you carry that you would sign up? Who is your Mary Magdalene? I've given you a few crumbs from my forest. That's all. Each of those could blossom into, and I'm an intuitive, so it's a bit of a nightmare because it really does do that. And then in the end, what I found for myself is that a rich tapestry emerges that feels like, for me, it has substance that I can respond to and try to take further if I'm led that way. I mean, I don't know. It's just, it's the Mary of your soul, I guess. And I think, as I said about the Grail, there are so many stories. There are so many points of view. Was it this? Was it this? Did you go here? Did you go there? What we have here is some of the teachings, and in some of the Gnostic Gospels, that's what we do have. We do know that. And she was a historical human being. There's no question about that. And so was he. I have no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we each have to answer that question in a way that really speaks to our hearts, I guess.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that is the crucial and vital element is how does it speak to us, and not, what is historically accurate and what isn't. We may never know entirely, but that isn't the primary point of any of this. It's how, how it affects us on our journey.
Absolutely.
And,
I really agree with you about that.
To the truth that is depicted in the Gospel of the Beloved Companion, especially in that passage with the tree. It's just, it says it all right there. That says it all. And that's the main thing. Yeah.
And that's what I mean. You don't really need any more than that, do you?
Exactly.
I mean, that's enough for a lifetime in my book.
Because then you will know directly, if you experience it, if you do your own journey, your own inner journey, and you open to the truth of who we are, then you will know exactly.
I think it's an invitation to become the mystic that you already are.
Yes.
And for me, because I happen to like the mystic Jung, my Jung is the one who writes the Red Book, and the one who has the visions, and who honors the dream and mythology and religion, and but there's not a right way to do it. It's you're your own visionary. I think that's what's happening in culture now, to the extent that so many people are on a search to find meaning in various ways, and we're all mystics and visionaries, not just Mary Magdalene, not just any mystic of East and West. I think that's the invitation. All that means really is that you go on your own path. You don't follow some institution. That's basically what it means.
Yeah. Well, we're out of time, unfortunately, because
one person I have to say hello to this.
Okay.
Pete.
Veronica, yes, thank you so much. I'm
happy to see you.
I'm very aware of the paltry representation of men on this in this talk. What you've just been saying raises in me the question, well, actually hold it off, and I wonder if you do, but have these archetypal stories and legends and figures throughout human history emerged somehow in the service of facilitating the collective individuation? Or is it through people such as Jung and yourself that we go looking for and find the metaphors that mirror the journey? I'm just kind of curious if you wonder that as well.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I suppose I'm still of the idea that each person is contributing to the collective. It sure doesn't look like it at the moment, but I think my job in terms of the teaching component is just to make these connections and see where it takes people. I don't have the answer at all. All I know is what I love to do in my heart. And I feel that invitation is open to everyone at any time. And I do think there is someone's mentioned the other day that something like 250 million people around the world are now meditating. Well, you don't hear any of that on the news. You just see the death and destruction as usual. But I truly believe there is a growing larger number of people, certainly children coming in. Some of them are already so advanced. I mean, it took 40 years for me to think about getting anywhere. And, I highly question that at the moment. But children are coming in with just extraordinary levels of consciousness. So I'm hopeful. I'm just one of those hopeful people. I don't know. Maybe it's Jupiter on my moon or something. I don't know. But I'm just hopeful.
Thank you.
So I don't know, Pete. I just know we all kind of struggle and muddle along in our own way, and hopefully, something happens. It's a painful path. It is. We all know that. Yeah.
We recently had both Anne Baring and David Lorimer in different presentations, and they both said it's the women that need to save the world, right? And we were saying, how do we unite all these people, men and women, the people who
men and women. I don't go down that road.
Right.
Sorry, I don't.
But
that's too prejudiced for me. There
whether
are
it's women or men, doesn't matter. It's how do we unite? I think there are so many different points of light, different groups, different organizations like Caritas, but so many all over the world trying to promote the evolution of consciousness that needs to make this shift, right? And I get impatient to know how to unite all these different, points of light, what I call points of light. But anyway, I think that it is in the process. And I think that what we're going through and the crises, everything is kind of labor pains, that trying to give birth, and the birth is not guaranteed, but trying to give birth to a new level of humanity. So,
well, you know what, too, because quantum physics also contributes the idea that there is already a unity.
Yes.
And that each person's contribution, for good or ill, goes into the collective quantum soup or whatever. And so I don't know whether it's the 100th monkey effect or what, but I also think it's probably a very slow, glacially slow. I think if any of us come back in about, I don't know, 1,000 years, maybe there'll be some improvement. But I don't think it's going to happen as quickly as people hope. Unfortunately, we can still hope, though. I still do.
Well, there's
here for a reason now, so that's the important thing.
Yeah, there's morphic resonance, right? So it's all in the field, as the quantum physicists say. It's all in the field. So that's how
we're contributing to.
Yes, absolutely.
Coming back out, however that works. I don't know. It's a great mystery, but yeah.
Well, thank you.
Field theory.
Thank you. One last quick question. What's in the works? Anything? Are you? What's happening?
What's in the works? I don't know. I haven't quite come to grips with that yet. I have been sort of thinking about offering some courses
Ah,
next year. That's what I've already designed some in my mind. Well, on my computer.
let me know so I can spread the word.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
I think I'd like to do that. And I may do another, I don't know. Recently I've got a lot of requests for doing another Magdalene journey. So I don't know whether I will or not. Maybe I'm getting too old to do that. I don't know. But yeah, I'll see.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Veronica.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I really do.
Well,
I really do. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
yes.
It means a lot that people show up for. It's just, I know you're in the middle of your day. I'm about to have dinner. So thank you very much for
Thank
coming,
you.
really.
Thank you.
Yeah.